Walensky. What I'd like to do now is just spend just a few minutes on underscoring and reiterating some of the important principles that Dr. Walensky had mentioned. I'm going to touch on 4 areas very quickly: transmissibility, severity, the evasion of immunity by vaccines, and the potential impact on therapeutics. I will point out that there is a relationship between interpreting the relationship between transmissibility and severity, and I'll explain what I mean in a moment. Next slide. No doubt, this is a highly transmissible infection. These are the latest data that we get from the CDC about the Omicron variant that is sequenced in the United States isolates. It is now about 73+%. And speaking to governors from other regions of the country, in some, they're even as high as 80 to 90%. So there is no doubt that we are dealing with a highly transmissible virus for the reason, as Jeff mentioned just a moment ago, that we expect that there will be continuing to have a substantial increase in cases. Next slide. Now we get to the idea of severity. These are data from our South African colleagues who have clearly been showing now in conversations we've had and now in this recent publication that in fact it appears that in the context of South Africa, there is a decrease in the severity compared to Delta, both in the relationship and ratio between hospitalizations and the number of infections, the duration of hospital stay, and the need for supplemental oxygen therapy. Recently, literally yesterday, there was another paper that came out from Scotland, which appears to validate and verify the data that are in South Africa. This is good news. However, we must wait to see what happens in our own population, which has its own demographic considerations. I would point out that even if you have a diminution in severity, if you have a much larger number of individual cases, the fact that you have so many more cases might actually obviate the effect of it being less severe. And that's one of the reasons why the president, in his remarks yesterday, spoke about how we are going to supplement the capability of hospitals to respond to the possibility that there might be a run on the need for hospitalization. Next slide. Now let's talk about some of the immune evasion. We've mentioned this in different briefings before, but just to reiterate, there's no doubt that there's a marked reduction in neutralizing activity against Omicron when you look at the 2-dose mRNA vaccines, when you compare Omicron to earlier variants such as Delta. However, and here again, why we emphasize the importance of booster shots, the anti-Omicron activity is about 20 to 40-fold higher in sera from boosted vaccinees versus the peak in individuals who had a 2-dose vaccine. This is validated by the clinical data, which shows that the vaccine efficacy, as we all know from previous studies, of a symptomatic infection of a 2-dose mRNA wanes over time. However, there's a moderate to high effectiveness, about 75%, seen in the early period after a booster dose, and very likely higher when it comes to hospitalization and severe disease. Next slide. A quick word now on something that Jeff mentioned, is namely the treatments that are available. Unfortunately, but understandably, with the degree of mutations that we have with Omicron, some of the monoclonal antibodies shown on the slide here very likely will not work against Omicron. And those are shown in the first 2 under monoclonal antibody. Fortunately, the GSK Vir product, sotrovimab, looks like it is well positioned to be used as a treatment against Omicron. And then the AZ product also is likely. Small molecule antivirals are available now. You heard the recent approval of an EUA of Paxlovid. Of note and underappreciated is remdesivir is already fully approved and is available in a 3-day course, which in a recent study showed to dramatically diminish the need for hospitalization. Guidelines on this will be now re-examined by the NIH Guidelines Committee, and you'll be hearing more about recommendations how to utilize these. If I can have the last slide. I want to again just reiterate what Dr. Walensky said about prevention, which is a multi-layered, comprehensive process, the hallmark of which is vaccination. Now, one of the questions that Dr. Walensky and I and Dr. Murthy and others get asked very frequently is that right now, as we get to the Christmas holiday and the New Year's, would it be safe for individuals who are vaccinated, who are boosted, to get together with family in the setting of the home? The answer to that is yes. An extra level of protection would be the testing that Dr. Walensky measured. But I want to make sure this is not confused with going to a large gathering. And there are many of these parties that have 30, 40, 50 people in which you do not know the vaccination status of individuals. Those are the kind of functions in the context of COVID, and particularly in the context of Omicron, that you do not want to go to. So to the extent possible, we urge you to stay away from those situations that could put you at a higher risk. I'll stop there and back to you, Jeff.